Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today I got a banger for you. We're gonna learn how to make the wet shit bass. Let's go. Here we are in our trusty Ableton. In order to make the wet shit bass, now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into how to make the wet shit bass. And the first question you probably have is, what exactly is the wet shit bass? Well, how we're going to define wet shit bass for today's video is, I see a lot of YouTube video tutorials about how to make specific presets, but none of them really talk about how to just get started making your own. That will be the focus of today's lesson. I'm going to give you a quick overview of Serum, and then we're going to run through just some general foundations of sound design and how to start making your own presets in Serum. So the first step in figuring out how to write in Serum is we need to understand what it is we're looking at here. So this is what Serum will look like when you first open it up. This one is oscillator A, and this one is oscillator B. If you can't tell, they're labeled. Anytime we're doing sound design, what we're actually doing is we're giving instructions to the speakers about how to move. You can look at this and think, okay, the speaker is going to push out all the way, snap back all the way, and then push back in, and it's just going to keep doing that really, really fast. So these instructions are called waveforms. The most basic waveforms that we have to make computer noises with is going to be in this basic shapes one. So we have a sine wave, and this one sounds very smooth. Then we have a saw wave, not as smooth. And then we've got a triangle wave. So it kind of sounds like a sine wave, but it's a bit crunchier. Then we've got our square wave. And then we have a variety of different pulse widths of our square wave. And then we have our inverted saw wave. These four, the sine, saw, triangle, and square, this is going to be your bread and butter right here. You're not going to need to go crazy with the waveforms. You have access to loads, but we don't need to worry about that right now because we're just learning how to start. You can think about this as this is what the instrument is going to sound like that we're going to be playing. Next, we're going to need to understand the shape that we want. There's pretty much just two shapes. There's short and then there's long. So some songs will have a bow, and some songs will have a ba. Whichever one you need is going to be dependent on the song that you're writing and ultimately what you're going for here. The way that that's normally controlled is using envelopes, and so this is ADSR. There are tons of videos on YouTube about ADSR, so I'm not going to go super in depth, but I like Serum because you can visually see the shape. So if we wanted a pluck, just make a pluck. Pretty straightforward. I usually just don't touch this at all. The easiest way to shape your sounds based on what you're trying to do here is using LFOs. What we'll do is we'll turn the level all the way down. So now when I play notes, nothing happens. You can see the keyboards getting played in there. What we're gonna do is assign the LFO to this. We'll start with all the way up. Now I'm looking at a quarter note here, and this makes a lot more sense for me trying to fill in a quarter note's worth of space on the grid. Maybe I wanted to do something like this. That's all we have to do, we're done. The modes here represents what it's going to do. Oh, that's nice. It pulls up a little explanation, but I'm going to make it even simpler. So these modes describe the behavior of the LFO based on how we're playing it. So off means that it's going to play quarter notes synced up with the project BPM, and it doesn't care where you're playing notes, or should I say when you're playing notes. So if I would just tap the keyboard arbitrarily, it's going to play quarter notes no matter what. That's probably not what we're looking for. Envelope is going to set this to behave like an envelope. So every time we press it, it's going to play the LFO. If we set it to trigger, it means that it's going to loop this indefinitely. That's essentially how this works. You've got some other controls here, like if you want to set it to hertz and stuff, you want to do triplets or dotted lengths. For now, we're just going to leave it at quarter note. We'll pretend that there's this really big epic build right before this part, and we need a stab right on the first note. We'll go ahead and just move this down into the sub region, and let's see how it plays. So it's taking up pretty much the amount of space that I want it to. And this is much quicker than trying to figure out the amount of milliseconds that you need. So that's why I prefer doing this. You can do it this way. There's really no wrong way to do it, but things start to get a bit more complex if we add another oscillator. Pretty much when it comes to sound design for the wet shit bass in particular, there's going to be one that's playing in the sub, and then there's going to be another one that's playing somewhere else, not in the sub. It's going to be higher. So we'll go ahead and crank this one up 2 octaves. And then we'll go ahead and throw this LFO on this volume level too. Bring that volume level all the way down. And let's hear how it sounds. We're getting there. This is pretty much the basis of almost all of the modern music that I hear that has like really large bass elements. Before we move on to, you know, the filter, the sub, the noise, anything else, we'll stay in these two windows here. Looking at these, we have unison, and this will tell you how many voices you have. This is good for like, if you're doing like plucks and like other prettier stuff. When it comes to bass design, you just don't touch these. These three are pretty much useless for what we're doing. This phase knob determines where it's going to start when we press the note, and this random is at 100 by default. But what this means is that every time I press the note, it's going to start somewhere else in the waveform. So if we bring the random all the way down, we'll see that this yellow part goes away. Now we just have one line. And if I move that phase, we can pick where we're going to start. That's going to be important in a sec, but I'll leave it at 180 for now. When you're designing basses, you just want nice, consistent sounds. So we'll go ahead and turn off random for both of those. Another way that we can begin to make more complex noises out of this is by opening up this warp menu. And so this is going to allow us to change the waveform here. Going through it, we have sync. And so this one essentially just keeps adding more of itself. So this will raise up the pitch of that one. Sync half, sync window. We've got a bunch of sync options. Bend, plus, and minus will change the shape of it like this. But primarily, if you clicked on this video, you listen to a lot of bass music and you want to know how to make bass music noises. Almost all the bass music noises I hear is either just volume or just one, and we'll go ahead and turn this down and it'll be FM from B. So now we're only listening to this one, and we'll go ahead and turn up FM from B a little bit. You can get some pretty harsh noises out of this, and I'm really sorry for anyone wearing headphones watching this. Sound design, it's in the weeds. It's down and dirty. So we got to get down and dirty. But this is essentially the start of it, right? Without any FM, if we watch the spectrum, we see this giant peak right here, and this is our fundamental, and we see a bunch of other stuff. And so these down here at like minus 90, minus 102, we're not even hearing these, we're just hearing that sine wave. If I start moving the FM up, we're going to start adding more harmonics to this area, and this is what we're going to be hearing more of. If we continue to crank the FM, we'll see that the area in which they all start to hover around is going to move up as well. Isn't that a lovely noise? So now we've covered FM, frequency modulation. Modulating the frequency so that different peaks start to show up. A fun experiment is if I turn this one all the way down to -4 and I turn this one all the way up, you can hear that it's literally going woo, woo, woo. That's literally the frequency modulation where it's going whoa, 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 whoa. The reason it's so slow is because I've got this one at -4 octaves, so it's probably like 10 hertz or something like that. So we can actually hear it. But if I put this back up to +2 and then I put this one back in the sub and I bring this back down, you can hear that it's buzzing a little bit. So that's what frequency modulation is. The other one is amplitude modulation. And if you recognize AM and FM from your radios, it's exactly what they stand for. Amplitude modulation is the same thing as frequency, except instead of the frequency we're changing the volume level. If I do the same experiment where I drop it -4 and we do like +3, it's not going back and forth on pitches now. It's just going whoa, 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 whoa. And you can hear that being applied to the level. There's ring modulation too, which is a bit more complicated, but you can also get some wild noises out of this. And I forget exactly how it works, but it has something to do with like subtracting and adding the frequencies back together. Ring mod's a fun one too, but pretty much we're only going to use these three, FM, AM, and RM, to make any of the wet shit basses we want. This doesn't sound very wet or shit in my opinion. It sounds kind of clean, to be honest. Well, we can grime it up. The last thing that we really need to look at on this oscillator page is the filter. And this is going to give you a lot of power with how your shitty bass is going to sound. So we'll pick something that would normally be quite difficult to listen to. So let's say like a square and a square wave into a saw wave. If I put the filter on, look at that. It's almost palatable. If I take the filter off, it's really not that bad. But if we crank the FM and do like crazy stuff with it, like we'll put this one at +4 and just see, we can start to move the cutoff up without assaulting our ears, and we can start to get more of the beef of the sound. You're always going to want to shape the volume level, but you'll also want to shape the filter cutoff if it's applicable. And so what that would sound like is if I took this and I brought it down, let's say we'll start at like around 100 hertz and we'll go up, yeah, I don't know, something like that. You can't really tell. It just sounds like more volume automation until I start to push the resonance, and that's when you can really hear what the filter's doing. Do you hear how it's almost talking now? This is another way that you can begin to shape your shitty basses. I kind of like that for now. Let's go ahead and listen to it in the beat for context real quick. In the filter tab, this number here is the slope at which the filter is going to cut off. If I turn this up to 24, the top end is much quieter. If it's at 6, it's almost not doing anything. It's just pushing the top down. I'll go ahead and leave it at 12 because the next step in our shitty bass design is going to be adding some distortion. Any type of saturator or distortion device is something that's going to add harmonics to the top. So I set the drive to 0%, dry wet at 100. It doesn't sound all that different, but if I start to crank the drive, you hear how it's starting to fill up the higher bands. That is one way to add higher harmonics to your sound. Another way, and this is particularly how we get the wet shitty bass, is to use a compressor. Very briefly, what a compressor does is once the volume of a signal reaches a certain threshold, the compressor is going to turn that signal down. With just your standard compressor, it's only going to look at the signal values. If we set it to multiband, now we essentially have 3 compressors that are focused on 3 separate bands of audio here. What's unique about multiband as well is that compression that pushes signal down is called downward compression. The opposite of that is called upward compression. And that's where if a volume level isn't high enough, the compressor is going to bring that volume level up. When we set this to multiband, it's going to get much quieter because the compressor is controlling the signals a lot more. And you hear how it's much like clearer now. If I turn off multiband, it's pretty much the same. But when I turn on multiband, crystal clear. And I'll turn up the gain a bit. This is why I have a limiter here, because it can get out of control pretty quick. And the point of sound design is not to, create the perfect signal. It's to get the sound that you want and then figure out how to put it in later. So I just go ahead and crank the gain. So now we can hear it better. Don't worry about those for now because that's just more science and we're learning about wet shit basses. In order to make a sound wet, what that really translates to on the spectrum is that there's not going to be a lot of mid frequencies. There'll be a lot of high and probably a lot of low sub because it's a bass. And when you think of a river, it sounds more like crinkling paper than it does like someone talking. So we'll go ahead and set these back to sine wave because we don't want a lot of overtones here. And then we'll turn this down. So it's cleaner now. We really don't even need FM. All we need to do is punch it through a distortion, and we'll go ahead and turn this up. If you've been following along this whole time, congratulations, you have officially made yourself a wet shit bass. There are a number of other things we can do to this to make it more wet and more shit, but by and large, we are about done. We can add a notch and that will start to make some weird noises. The order of these matter. And so the signal flow in the effects tab goes from up to down. So first it's going into the distortion, then it's going into the compressor, then it's going into the EQ. To move these around, you can just move them around like that. The ones that are off don't matter. If you want to put all the ones on next to each other, that's fine too. But if we were to put this up here before the distortion, it's not really going to do all that much because this is already a pretty clean signal. So we've messed up the signal a little bit, and now let's move around the frequency knob. Yeah, that's starting to sound real poopy. It's starting to sound a little too poopy for me. But if that's what you're going for, that's what you're going for. For me, I'm going to go ahead and stick with these sines for now, and we'll move on to making a longer one. In order to dial it in, you just move around this LFO. Yeah, that sounds fine. There is our first shitty bass, and we're going to move on to making, let's say we'll make a longer one this time. Okay, so when it comes to making longer ones, no matter what we're doing in the Serum patch, we're going to want to write long MIDI notes. This is going to be the note that we'll draw for the rest of it. And we'll go ahead and pitch this down into the subregion as well. You can also just change the octave on the main oscillator that you're using. It really doesn't matter. We're getting to the same place either way. The main difference between long ones and short ones is that what we did with this one was turn our level all the way down and assign an LFO to it. The level's not up, so when we play a note, nothing's going to happen. We turn the level up. Now it's listening to the envelope, and so I leave my envelope sustain all the way up. So we'll go ahead and turn the level all the way up. Actually, I just kind of want to make a rhythm bass. I don't know why. We'll make the MIDI note the whole length of, the response area, because this is going to be the call and this is the response. We'll go ahead and make the MIDI note the full length. And now this is a trick my friend showed me. Shout out Ash, bro. What you do is you take the comb filter, and you want one with the ridges because there's some without the ridges and I don't really get it. You set this to a saw wave. Let's set this one to eighth notes. So that way it's going bop, 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 bop. Now to get a larger movement on it, what we'll do is we'll set this to trigger, and we'll set this one to trigger as well. And we're going to use a quarter note rate. So this is going to be double the length of an eighth note. And we'll go ahead and put this on the cutoff. Right now it's going bipolar. We want it to go monopolar. So it's Alt Option or Alt Shift click. And we'll just bring it down. Before this even plays, I have an idea of what this is going to sound like, but pretty much this is going to hit. And on the first half of this one, the comb's going to go Reh. And on the second half, the comb's going to go Ew. So let's hear. Right? Pretty sick. And we can begin to shape these LFOs a little bit more. We'll treat this one like the top, and this one is going to be the bottom one. So this is going to be our sub. We'll leave that where it is, turn off our random phases. We have a nice sub signal with a little bit of ridiculousness on top. We can turn up the octaves here. Go ahead and crank the unison. I feel like that's just not chaotic enough. So let's see, we'll go all the way. Yeah, that sounds lovely. Now we'll go ahead and smash it into a distortion. And we'll go ahead and put on the multiband, and oh yeah, isn't that good? Isn't that nice? Yeah, okay, that's good enough. But that's pretty much the idea of how you make it. Watch me turn this into a trap beat. Our sick trap beat is ready to go and get filled up with all types of other shit. I am going to go ahead and make a different patch for each of these 4 little areas here. Okay, so here's going to be our 4. FM, do AM, FM again, wet shit. Okay. So it's been about 10 minutes, and here are all of the fill basses that I have. I added the snare, I added a little bit extra kick. This is at least somewhat palatable. Here are our 4 brand new wet shit basses made using the exact same techniques I just showed you. I'll show you how to make these. We've covered this one already. Just at first glance, you should be able to tell what's going on based on what the waveforms are and the shape of the LFO. Everything else is going to be just pretty much the same every time. But you understand that this is the beef of the sound, and then we can infer that because the shape of the LFO, that it's on the cutoff and the volume. Maybe it's on this one, we don't know, but just on first glance, these two obviously. A little bit of tube, a little bit of multiband. The next one is the AM. This one, since I just want it to be a sustained note, I have not used the LFO. We're just using the envelope, and I cranked the volume on this. I added a little bit of noise to it, and that's exactly what this tab does. That's why I didn't really talk about it that much. It's literally just noise. We don't have much of a bass signal on this. All you would need to do for that is turn the sub on and then crank the volume on it. 1 multiband. And then this one is a classic when it comes to like rhythm tear out. So we're doing FM again, and we've still got the filter. But what's different about this one is I've put the compressor before the distortion, and I've set the distortion to downsample, not tube. What it does is it reduces the quality of the signal. We already sort of have the signal here, but I want it to speak more. So I've turned this drive into a spot where it's more in like human speech frequency band. And that's pretty much it on that one. We've got the LFO here, and it's doing some stuff to the FM, but aside from that, really nothing else. We've got the level up too. And then on this one, that one is truly diarrhea. We've got FM from that's right. We've got FM coming from our sub signal into a higher oscillator. And so it's giving us that really sort of like kind of sound. This is what's called a frog drum, I think. Again, we've got some tube, we got some multiband. While it wasn't any patch in particular, I hope that this video has been helpful in motivating you to start making your own basses. It's a lot simpler than you would think at first glance. When you're making your own, don't think like this has to be perfect. Just throw the LFO on the volume until it's in the sub and just start there, and then start just messing with the other effects. You'll get different sounds by combing through the octaves on either either of the oscillators, as well as trying different filters and trying different distortions. But those are pretty much the only things that you're going to change to get like really big differences. Thank you so much, so much for watching me make shitty basses today. It's been a pleasure. As always, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you know when I post, and we'll see you in the next one.